What kind of man bows before the corpse of his own brother and calls it an act of loyalty? A samurai. Say the word and your mind fills with images of honor-bound warriors, steel-clad guardians who lived and died by an ancient code. But what happens when that honor demands blood? Not from invaders, not from traitors, but from your own bloodline, your own family. In feudal Japan, loyalty wasn't a virtue, it was a weapon, a condition for survival. And in the hierarchy of devotion, the family didn't just fall second, it fell off the list entirely. Parents, replaceable. Brothers, collateral. Emotion, a weakness to be sliced clean. A samurai's life revolved around one unshakable law, giri, which meant duty above all else. And when duty demanded betrayal, even a moment's hesitation was as dangerous as open rebellion. If your clan demanded your brother's head, you offered it. If your lord suspected your cousin of disloyalty, you drew your sword before the doubt could even be spoken aloud. This wasn't personal, it wasn't revenge, it was protocol. Because in the samurai world, survival wasn't based on strength or blood ties. It was measured in obedience. And the more you could erase feeling from your actions, the more worthy you became. Let's step inside a world where brotherhood wasn't sacred, it was disposable. Bound by blood, broken by Bushido. The Bushido code wasn't some poetic warrior's oath passed down in delicate calligraphy or whispered under cherry blossoms. It was a psychological prison, a tough doctrine that seeped into the bones of every samurai from the moment they could stand. It didn't teach strength, it demanded emotional silence. Love had no place in a warrior's heart. Compassion was an indulgence of the weak. Even the bonds of childhood, those fragile threads formed between brothers sharing meals, sparring in dusty courtyards, or whispering secrets before sleep, were seen as dangerous distractions. They weren't nurtured, they were severed. Because those bonds could compromise your loyalty, and nothing stood above loyalty. From boyhood, samurai were trained not just to kill, but to detach. Training wasn't about perfecting technique alone, it was about killing the instinct to protect those you loved. They were taught to bow before steel, not sentiment. To honor the blade over blood, the sword was constant, emotion was a liability. And those you trained beside were not family, they were fellow weapons, replaceable, expendable, sometimes even threatening. A brother was not a brother in the world of Bushido. He was another warrior, another piece in the machine, another potential crack in the armor of loyalty. If he failed, questioned, hesitated, or disobeyed the clan's strict moral code, then the system would not hesitate to erase him. And it would use you, his own flesh and blood, to do it. Empathy was seen as a malfunction, kind of like crying during a sword fight. Very off-brand. So when the day came that your blade was called upon to strike down your own kin, you didn't ask why. You didn't plead for mercy or look for a way out. You did what you were conditioned to do. You didn't flinch, you didn't cry, you bowed and you obeyed. There were no screams, no dramatic speeches, just the cold, sharp silence of duty fulfilled, the ritual complete. Because Bushido did not reward love, it rewarded discipline. It didn't care if the hands holding the sword once held your brother's. It only cared that the sword struck clean and without pause. This was not just loyalty. It was the erasure of identity in favor of obedience. And in that world, blood didn't unite. It was simply something that got spilled when duty required it. And once emotion was eliminated, the next step was total obedience to someone above even family. Lords before bloodlines, the daimyo's word was law. In the rigid hierarchy of feudal Japan, loyalty wasn't a choice, it was a chain. And at the top of that chain stood the daimyo, the feudal lord whose word carried the weight of life and death. For the samurai, his loyalty didn't belong to his father, his brother, or even his own beliefs. It belonged solely to the man he served. Personal feelings were not just irrelevant, they were dangerous. A moment of hesitation could unravel generations of discipline, so it was never allowed to exist in the first place. Disobedience was not rebellion, it was blasphemy. It didn't result in a slap on the wrist or a demotion. It led to immediate execution or the slow, excruciating path of seppuku, ritual suicide, performed not in shame but in duty. Even a whisper of resistance could trigger your end. And the most terrifying part, that end often came not from an enemy's blade, but from the hands of a fellow samurai, someone just as trapped in the code as you were. When a daimyo gave a command, no matter how morally twisted or emotionally unbearable, it wasn't to be questioned. Orders were delivered like death sentences, calm and clear, and obeyed without a flicker of doubt. Even if that command meant ending the life of a cousin, a mentor, or the very man who once lifted you onto his shoulders as a child. In that moment, nothing mattered but execution of the order and of the person. Turns out the only thing thicker than blood was bureaucracy. Samurai were not raised to ask why. That word was erased before it could ever take root. Instead, they were trained to ask how fast and how clean. Honor came not from reflection, but from reaction, from how efficiently you erased your own instincts. Their training ensured that morality never had time to speak. It was drowned beneath a lifetime of ritual, silence, and steel. Within that machinery of obedience, family ties became liabilities. They were weak threads spun in a world that only respected chains of command. And when those threads were tested, they snapped, not in chaos, not in defiance, but with surgical precision, executed in silence, as if love had never existed in the first place. Because in the world of the samurai, family wasn't sacred. Orders were. But what happened when brothers didn't just follow different orders but swore loyalty to rival clans? Could you raise your sword against the only person who ever truly knew you just because your lord demanded it? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold truths from history they don't teach in textbooks. Clan rivalries, when brothers wore different banners. During the Sengoku period, Japan was fractured beyond recognition. It wasn't just a nation at war. It was a nation eating itself alive. Civil war raged for more than a century, with provinces turning into battlegrounds and alliances shifting like shadows. The empire wasn't divided by borders, but by blades, and in that chaos, loyalty wasn't clear-cut. It was personal, often deadly, and sometimes split between two brothers. It wasn't uncommon to see one brother riding under the banner of the Takeda while the other swore fealty to Oda. These weren't symbolic allegiances. They were all-consuming vows, sealed not just by honor, but by blood oaths and ancestral duty. And when the clans finally clashed on scorched fields under ash-gray skies, there were no handshakes, no reunions, no last-minute truces whispered between siblings. There was only steel drawn fast and driven hard, with no room left for hesitation. These weren't tragic anomalies told in hushed stories centuries later. They were routine, ordinary, expected. Families were torn not by hatred but by obligation to rival masters. Fathers fought sons. Brothers clashed without pause. Loyalty didn't unite blood. It cut through it. And when the time came to face each other on the battlefield, there was no room for recognition, only survival. In those brutal moments, you didn't see your brother's face. You saw his armor, his crest, the symbol of your enemy. That was all that mattered. Each man fought as if the other were just another soldier. Because under the weight of Bushido, that's exactly what he had become. A threat, a liability, a sword pointed at your lord and by extension at you. Blood may have run through your veins, but it didn't shield you from death. It didn't grant you mercy, and it certainly didn't absolve you of disloyalty. Because in the world of endless war, bloodlines meant nothing. Banners did, and if the battlefield didn't test that bond, a much colder death ritual would, seppuku or slaughter. The honor in killing those closest In the rigid code of samurai life, death was never far, but sometimes it came not at the hands of an enemy or on the battlefield. Sometimes it arrived quietly, ceremoniously, from the hands of someone you loved. Because in the world of the samurai, killing a brother wasn't just permitted, it was considered merciful. When a samurai disgraced his clan, whether through defeat, hesitation, political failure, or perceived disloyalty, redemption was no longer an option. The path forward narrowed to two grim choices: die by your own hand, or be executed by someone you trusted. Either way, death was mandatory, but how you met it defined your legacy. Seppuku was the most honorable way to die. Ritual suicide, performed with precision and composure, was seen as the final act of devotion, a chance to reclaim one's lost honor in a moment of total control. The condemned samurai would kneel, draw a short blade, and drive it deep into his own stomach, slicing across in agony. At least samurai had closure and excellent sword control. But the ritual didn't end there. It never did, because seppuku was brutal, painful, and often slow. That's where the kaishakunin came in the second. Their duty was not to punish, but to deliver mercy. After the fatal cut was made, they would step forward and swiftly sever the dying man's head, granting a clean, dignified end. That role required more than skill. It required trust, absolute, unwavering trust. And who could be trusted more than family? In many cases, that second was a cousin, a childhood friend, a comrade in arms. But sometimes, when honor demanded a deeper sacrifice, it was a brother. A man raised beside you, a man who knew your fears, your victories, your weaknesses. And in that final moment, he would draw his blade not in anger, but in duty. This wasn't seen as betrayal. It was seen as the ultimate favor, a final act of compassion wrapped in violence, a silent message that even in disgrace you were still worth the effort of a clean death. To kill your own sibling without rage, without pause, and with perfect technique, that was the highest form of loyalty. A love so contorted by the demands of honor that it no longer looked like love at all. Just steel, silence, and surrender. But even before disgrace, betrayal always lingered, quietly watching. Betrayal was always one step away. The samurai didn't just fear death, they feared disgrace. Because in their world, dying with a blade in your hand was honorable, but living with a stain on your name was a fate far worse. Honor was currency and perception was everything. It didn't matter who you truly were, it only mattered what others believed you to be. In that kind of world where survival depended not on truth but on appearances, the first strike often came from within. Brothers turned on brothers not out of hatred but out of fear. You didn't wait to be accused. You moved first. Loyalty meant preemption. It meant sacrificing personal bonds to protect your standing and your life. Paranoia wasn't a breakdown of the system, it was the system. It kept everyone alert, obedient, and useful. You were expected to monitor your peers, report their slips, question their motives, even if they were family, especially if they were family. Because who else could get close enough to betray you? To preserve your name, your rank, your clan's future, you might be forced to strike before anyone had the chance to accuse you. And if the one you had to cut down was your brother, your cousin, your childhood friend, then so be it. The law didn't punish those who acted to protect loyalty. It praised them. It elevated them. Hesitation was suicide. Action, no matter how cold, was survival. In the samurai world, betrayal didn't wear the face of an enemy soldier. Sometimes it looked like the boy you once sparred with under the plum trees, the one who knew your secrets, the one who swore to protect you, and when it came time to act, there were no tears, no speeches, just a clean strike, a quiet death, and a name preserved. Because betrayal wasn't always criminal. Sometimes it was legal, and sometimes it was necessary. And that pressure would soon fracture one of Japan's most famous clans, the tragedy of the Asano clan. History often remembers the tale of the 47 Ronin as a symbol of loyalty, honor and righteous revenge. But behind the legend lies a darker truth, one soaked not just in blood but in division. Because before those men avenged their lord, the Asano clan was already bleeding, and it was their own hands holding the knives. When Asano Naganori drew his blade and attacked court official Kira Yoshinaka inside Edo Castle, it wasn't just a breach of etiquette, it was an earthquake. The punishment came swiftly. Naganori was ordered to commit seppuku not in battle or in glory, but in shame. With his death, the clan's future fell into uncertainty. But the real tragedy hadn't happened yet. It was only the beginning. The moment their lord died, the retainers of the Asano household were faced with an impossible choice. Some swore immediate revenge, vowing to restore their master's honor at any cost. Others went silent, frozen by fear, unsure whether loyalty meant action or restraint. And then there were those who turned inward, who were forced to protect the Asano name not from outsiders but from their own brothers. The shogunate was watching. Any sign of rebellion and the Asano holdings would be stripped entirely. Families would be scattered, names erased. In this climate, loyalty wasn't a unifying force. It was a test. One that pitted man against man, cousin against cousin. Some were pressured to inform on their fellow samurai, to distance themselves from the rebels, to burn bridges they once swore to protect. This wasn't just a story of vengeance. It was a political nightmare. Power didn't belong to those who shouted loudest. It belonged to those who knew when to stay silent, when to act, and when to sacrifice kin for the illusion of control. Men who once trained together now exchanged cold glances, knowing that survival meant choosing a side. In the end, the 47 Ronin did avenge Asano, but by the time they acted, the damage had already been done. The clan was fractured, trust had been shattered, and the loyalty they're now celebrated for came at the cost of brotherhood, safety, and peace. And while history praises their devotion, religion silently helped enforce their sacrifice. Confucianism and control. Filial piety was twisted. You might assume that Confucianism, with its deep emphasis on family, respect for elders, and harmonious relationships, would have safeguarded brotherhood among the samurai, that it would have been a shield, protecting sons from betraying fathers, brothers from turning on each other. But in the samurai world, those teachings were not preserved. They were repurposed, twisted into tools of control. Yes, Confucianism said to honor your father, but in feudal Japan that command came with an asterisk. Honor your father unless your lord demanded otherwise. Honor your elders unless loyalty to the clan required silence. The message was clear. Family mattered, but not as much as the hierarchy. You didn't serve your brother. You didn't even serve your blood. You served your position, your title, your superiors. And if those loyalties clashed, the family was the first to be sacrificed. Filial piety, once meant to protect family structure, became a method for reinforcing political obedience. It was no longer about care and devotion. It was about submission and silence. A well-behaved son wasn't one who loved his parents. He was one who didn't question orders, even if those orders tore his family apart. The state became the new father, and defying it was a sin far worse than disobeying your actual kin. Emotion was seen as dangerous. Individual loyalty was treason wrapped in sentiment. Love could compromise judgment. Sorrow could delay action. And in a world where hesitation could cost your clan its standing, there was no room for either. Even Buddhism, with its focus on detachment and inner peace, was twisted into justification. If the path to enlightenment required freedom from earthly attachments, then wasn't killing your brother just another step towards spiritual discipline? Religion didn't soften the samurai, it hardened them. It gave them vocabulary for cruelty and ritual for violence. Confucianism taught them where to place their loyalty upward. Buddhism taught them how to numb themselves to the consequences. Together, they didn't offer salvation. They offered obedient silence. Spirituality in the samurai class became just another layer of armor. It didn't protect the soul, it silenced it. And once reputation took priority, even innocent brothers became expendable. Legacy above life. Blood was a threat to reputation. Sometimes killing a brother wasn't about following an order. It wasn't a direct command whispered down from a daimyo or spelled out in a formal decree. It was about something far colder, optics, how things looked, how silence was maintained, how a family story was shaped to satisfy the expectations of power. If a brother posed a threat to the clan's image not through open rebellion but through scandal, rumor, or personal failure, then his presence alone became dangerous. Weakness was contagious, and perception in the samurai world held more weight than truth. A single misstep could ripple outward, staining the family name for generations. So removing that threat, even when it shared your blood, wasn't seen as betrayal. It was seen as nobility. These acts weren't carried out on public stages. They happened in quiet rooms, behind closed doors, with unreadable expressions and practiced rituals. Internal cleansing was common, especially in powerful households where appearance equaled influence. Some were quietly executed, their deaths explained away as accidents, illnesses, or disappearances. Others were given the illusion of choice, pushed toward seppuku not as punishment, but as a final act of loyalty. And every time it was dressed in the same careful language. Protect the name, preserve the bloodline, uphold our honor. These weren't just phrases, they were tools used to justify the erasure of anything inconvenient, including family. They made violence sound righteous. They made exile sound like sacrifice. They reframed shame as strategy. And in doing so, they turned brother against brother without ever raising a sword themselves. To preserve a legacy often meant editing it, trimming away the flaws, silencing the voices that didn't fit the narrative. A son with a different opinion, a cousin who failed in battle, a brother who drank too much, talked too freely, or simply asked the wrong questions. They became cracks in the image, and cracks were unacceptable. Samurai clans didn't just build their names through war, they curated them, maintained them like sacred relics, and anything or anyone that threatened the illusion of perfection was quietly, efficiently removed, even if they were family, especially if they were family. The final cut, when brotherhood meant nothing. By the end of a samurai's life, what remained? Perhaps a name, a record in clan archives, whispers of valor traded between old men who remembered his posture more than his face. If fortune allowed, there was a legacy. Not one etched in warmth or brotherhood, but carved in obedience, blood, and silence. Because in the end, the samurai wasn't remembered for who he loved, only for how well he obeyed. The samurai system didn't merely demand obedience, it rewired the soul. It began with a boy, a child who once clung to his brother's hand in fear, who still believed in protection, in connection, in something beyond duty. Then it began to break him, quietly, without mercy. He was trained to see danger where once he saw family, taught to question loyalty that wasn't sanctioned by rank. The warmth of kinship was replaced by the cold grip of protocol. And when the day came that the blade had to fall, it didn't shake. There was no hatred or hesitation, only execution, clean, controlled, composed. And that's what made it so terrifying, not the violence, but how deeply accepted it had become. Not that he killed, but that he did so with pride. He didn't mourn or explain, he fulfilled his role. To the outside world, it may look like betrayal, but in the world of the samurai, this was devotion sharpened to its cruelest point. A kind of loyalty that erased identity. A kind of love that demanded silence then sacrifice. So when the final chapter closed, there were no true keepsakes, no untouched memories, no quiet triumphs of love that survived the war inside. Only the sword, the silence, and the scars no one saw. The boy who once promised to protect his brother? He never made it to the end, the death of brotherhood. The story of the samurai is often painted in elegance, discipline, loyalty. But beneath the armor and ceremony lies a darker truth, one far less poetic. What good is loyalty when it demands the death of your own brother? What good is strength if it requires silence in the face of injustice? The samurai code didn't simply ask for obedience, it required the removal of anything personal, anything human. These men weren't born cold. They were broken, rebuilt, and redeployed. From childhood, they were taught that love was a weakness, that morality was flexible, that the only thing worth protecting was the name of their clan. So when a samurai was ordered to strike down his own blood, he didn't hesitate. Not because he didn't care, but because he had been trained not to. In a world where hesitation meant disgrace and compassion meant disloyalty, survival came at the cost of everything else, even brotherhood. The tragedy isn't that they died. It's what they had to become just to live. Would you survive that world? A world where you had to kill the part of yourself that loved, questioned, and felt? Comment down below. If these hidden truths shocked you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories history tried to hide.